Learn English through stories C44 PDF. Adopted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Content 1. Mini stories. 2. Family gathering. 3. Picture dictionary page. Story 1. As one approaches some crossroads, one comes to a sign which says that drivers have to stop when they come to the main road ahead. At other crossroads, drivers have to go slow, but they do not actually have to stop, unless, of course, there is something coming along the main road. And at still others, they do not have either to stop or to go slow, because they are themselves on the main road. Mr. Williams, who was always a very careful driver, was driving home from work one evening when he came to a crossroads. It had a slow sign, so he slowed down when he came to the main road, looked both ways to see that nothing was coming, and then drove across without stopping completely. At once he heard a police whistle, so he pulled in to the side of the road and stopped. A policeman walked over to him with a notebook and pencil in his hand and said, "You didn't stop at that crossing." "But the sign there doesn't say stop," answered Mr. Williams. "It just says slow, and I did go slow." The policeman looked around him, and a look of surprise came over his face. Then he put his notebook and pencil away, scratched his head and said, "Well, I'll be fired, I am in the wrong street." Story 2. Before the last war, officers in the Navy had a lot more freedom when their ship was in port than they have nowadays. They were expected to lead a busy social life and to take an active part in sport on shore. It was therefore rather difficult for them to find time to do all their other duties. Usually, all the officers in a ship used to have a regular meeting together once a week to receive orders from their captain, make reports, and discuss any business that had to be discussed, such as who should represent the ship in the next football match. One such meeting was being held on board one day, and after the regular business had been completed, the time came to discuss the date of the next meeting. Friday of the next week was suggested, and so was Monday of the week after, but both of them interfered with somebody's arrangements for the weekend, and in the end it was generally agreed that the meeting should be held on Wednesday, as this would be the least likely day to interfere with anybody's convenience, since it was right in the middle of the week. As the officers were leaving, however, one of them was heard to say, "Wednesday is the worst day, because it interferes with 2 weekends. Story 3. Mr. and Mrs. Williams had always spent their summer holidays in England in the past, in a small boarding house at the seaside. One year, however, Mr. Williams made a lot of money in his business, so they decided to go to Rome and stay at a really good hotel while they went around and saw the sights of that famous city. They flew to Rome and arrived at their hotel late one evening. They expected that they would have to go to bed hungry, because in the boarding houses they had been used to in the past, no meals were served after 7 o'clock in the evening. They were therefore surprised when the clerk who received them in the hall of the hotel asked them whether they would be taking dinner there that night. "Are you still serving dinner then?" asked Mrs. Williams. "Yes, certainly, madam," answered the clerk. "We serve it until 9:30. "What are the times of meals then?" asked Mr. Williams. "Well, sir," answered the clerk, "we serve breakfast from 7 to 11:30 in the morning, lunch from 12 to 3 in the afternoon, tea from 4 to 5, and dinner from 6 to 9:30. "But that hardly leaves any time for us to see the sights of Rome," said Mrs. Williams in a disappointed voice. Story 4. Mrs. Black was having a lot of trouble with her skin, so she went to her doctor about it. He could not find anything wrong with her, however, so he sent her to the local hospital for some tests. The hospital, of course, sent the results of the tests direct to Mrs. Black's doctor, and the next morning he telephoned her to give her a list of the things that he thought she should not eat, as any of them might be the cause of her skin trouble. Mrs. Black carefully wrote all the things down on a piece of paper, which she then left beside the telephone while she went out to a ladies' meeting. When she got back home 2 hours later, she found her husband waiting for her. He had a big basket full of packages beside him, and when he saw her, he said, "Hello, dear, I have done all your shopping for you." "Done all my shopping?" she asked in surprise. "But how did you know what I wanted?" "Well, when I got home, I found your shopping list beside the telephone," answered her husband. "So I went down to the shops and bought everything you had written down." Of course, Mrs. Black had to tell him that he had bought all the things the doctor did not allow her to eat. Story 5. Some young soldiers who had recently joined the army were being trained in modern ways of fighting, and one of the things they were shown was how an unarmed man could trick an armed enemy and take his weapon away from him. First, one of their two instructors took a knife away from the other, using only his bare hands, and then he took a rifle away from him in the same way. After the lesson, and before they went on to train the young soldiers to do these things themselves, the two instructors asked them a number of questions to see how well they had understood what they had been shown. One of the questions was this: "Well, you now know what an unarmed man can do against a man with a rifle. Imagine that you are guarding a bridge at night and that you have a rifle. Suddenly, you see an unarmed enemy soldier coming towards you. What will you do?" The young soldier who had to answer this question thought carefully for a few seconds before he answered, and then said, "Well, after what I have just seen, I think that the first thing I would do would be to get rid of my rifle as quickly as I could, so that the unarmed enemy soldier couldn't take it from me and kill me with it." Story 6. A certain poet had written a play, and arrangements were being made to perform it. Of course, the poet was asked to give his advice on the scenery, the lighting, and all the other things that helped to make a play successful, and he proved to be a very difficult man to please, as he had his own very definite ideas of how each scene should look. In one of the scenes in the play, it was necessary to produce the effect of a wonderful sunset, which the young lovers watched together before singing one of their great love songs. The theater electricians worked very hard to produce this sunset effect. They tried out all kinds of arrangements and combinations of lights: red lights, orange lights, yellow lights, blue lights, lights from above, lights from behind, lights from the front, lights from the sides. But nothing satisfied the poet until suddenly he saw exactly the effect that he had been dreaming of producing ever since he had written his play. "That's it!" he shouted excitedly to the electricians behind the stage. "That's just right, keep it exactly like that." "I'm sorry, sir," answered the chief electrician, "but we can't keep it like this." "Why ever not?" asked the poet angrily. "Because the theater is on fire, sir," answered the chief electrician. "That's what is producing the effect you can see now." 2. Family gathering. It was a bright and sunny day, and my family was gathered together in our backyard. The smell of barbecue filled the air, and laughter echoed across the yard. My mom, dad, sister, and I were all there, along with a few aunts, uncles, and cousins. As we sat down to eat, my dad decided to tell a joke. He had a habit of doing this at family gatherings, and we all loved it. This time, he told us a story about a man who went to a zoo and saw a gorilla reading a book. The man was amazed and asked the zookeeper how the gorilla learned to read. The zookeeper replied, "He started with the ABCs just like everyone else." We all burst out laughing, and my dad beamed with pride. But then, my mom decided to tell a joke of her own. She told us a story about a man who went to a doctor with a lettuce leaf sticking out of his ear. The doctor asked, "How did that happen?" The man replied, "I was trying to make a salad, but I couldn't hear the instructions." Again, we all laughed, but this time my dad looked a little annoyed. He had been upstaged by my mom, and he wasn't happy about it. So he decided to retaliate by telling us another joke. This one was about a man who walked into a bar with a parrot on his shoulder. The bartender asked, "Why do you have a parrot?" The man replied, "He's my wingman." My dad's joke was met with mixed reactions. Some of us thought it was funny, while others thought it was a little corny. But then, my sister chimed in with a joke of her own. She told us a story about a man who went to a party and saw a woman he liked. He walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, but I think you dropped something." She asked, "What did I drop?" He replied, "My jaw." By this point we were all laughing so hard that tears were streaming down our faces. My dad had been upstaged by both my mom and my sister, but he didn't seem to mind anymore. We were all having such a good time that we didn't want it to end. After dinner, we decided to play a game of charades. My mom went first, and she acted in the movie Titanic. We all guessed it right away, and my mom beamed with pride. Then, my dad took his turn. He sang, "Aaj mere jar ke shadi hai." Today is the wedding of my friend. It was hilarious to watch him try to sing without making any noise, and we all guessed the song right away. Next, it was my sister's turn. She acted out the book Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. We all guessed it right away, but my sister was disappointed. She had wanted to stump us, but we were too good. Finally, it was my turn. I acted out the phrase, "Happy birthday." My family guessed it right away, but then my dad said, "Wait a minute, it's not anyone's birthday today." I replied, "I know, I just wanted to see if you guys were paying attention." We all laughed and hugged each other, grateful for the funny time we had shared together. It was moments like these that made me realize how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family. We might not always agree on everything, but we could always come together and laugh. As the sun began to set and the stars came out, we all sat around the fire pit and roasted marshmallows. We talked about old times and made plans for the future. But mostly, we just enjoyed each other's company, knowing that we had created a memory that would last a lifetime. As I went to bed that night, I felt a warm glow in my heart. I knew that I was part of a family that loved to laugh and have fun. And I knew that no matter what happened in the future, we would always have each other. Free, Picture Dictionary page.